Today I want to share with you my record over the board tournament win. This was a game that I played last Friday, October 15th, in my final tournament at the Marshall Chess Club in New York. I've been playing some tournaments there since the summer, signed up for a sort of trial membership, played in some tournaments. It's a little bit far away, so I won't be renewing, but it was a good experience playing there. I mean, it's one of the oldest and nicest clubs in the country, and they actually just got some new pieces, as you can see. Those are really nice to play with. And this was a 5-round 90 plus 30 tournament, open to everyone rated under 2400 USCF. And the funny thing was, this first round, I was paired against an opponent who his rating was provisionally about 2430. Now, ever since, it's been readjusted to about 2325. He's only played a couple tournaments in the U.S. He's originally from Greece, I believe, according to his FIDE profile. He's about 2160 FIDE. And how did I manage to beat him? That's what we're going to be looking at in this video. So when I saw the list of registrants, I was kind of looking at their profiles a little bit, trying to see like maybe I can do a little bit of prep if I have some time before the tournament. And I did look at his, I found his chess.com profile, and I saw that against e4 he plays a couple different Sicilians. He might play sort of the Najdorf, he might play the classical Sicilian, and probably he knows them better than me. So I was looking, okay, like what does he play against the English? Because I can play that too. Oh, okay, so he plays actually into the 4 knights, and this e3 move he's only faced a handful of times, and every time he's kind of played something different, which kind of indicates that he doesn't really have one set way of playing against it. So I decided to play this, and this is kind of like one of my favorite systems in the English. It's a little bit less common than the fianchetto line with g3, but it can be a little bit of a dangerous weapon. And so he plays kind of the most critical move with bishop e4. There's also d5, maybe d6. He goes bishop e4, I go queen c2, and he takes the knight, which looks a little bit strange. You know, why is he trading off the bishop? But this is all pretty much theory. Black will trade off this bishop, try to damage white's structure, and then play d6 and castle. Only I don't take with the pawn. With either pawn, I take with the queen. And this preserves the structure, and basically what I'm arguing is that you gave me the bishop, I now have the bishop pair. Right now the position is closed, but when it opens later, I will have the advantage. And so he plays queen e7 to guard his e-pawn. And now another interesting move here, b3. I learned about this move in this line a while back, and I've been experimenting with it, and I quite like it. The idea is basically to play bishop b2, pressure black along this diagonal, play bishop e2, and actually white can castle either way. Obviously, long castling is going to be a little bit more risky, but you know, if you're feeling up for it, sometimes you can do it. And so he plays d5, which is the most critical move, striking in the center. Now, if I were to take the pawn, then he takes the knight. Already my queen is hit, a little bit unpleasant. So, and if I played bishop b2, trying to aim for the e-pawn, this is also unpleasant, d4. Kind of cramping me down the center. I obviously can't take because then there's this discovered check, and I'm actually losing the queen. So I simply played d4, right? This is kind of like the main way to meet d5. And I've seen this position. I played it a couple times online. Typically, people will take on d4, and it'll look a little bit something like this. They could develop their bishop, and then this is actually one game I had online against an FM went like this. You know, both sides castle, and like pretty standard stuff. I have the bishop, he's got the knight. But he instead played knight e4 here, hitting my queen, and so I realized if I drop back to c2, he can attack me again. So I went to b2, which looks a little bit strange. It's kind of like the queen is assuming the bishop's position, but queen is pretty safe there, and I'm not letting him attack me with tempo. And so now he thought for a little bit and played bishop e6. And so this is the first moment where I was really out of prep. I hadn't ever seen this bishop e6 move, even though when I checked later in the database, it's been played quite a few times. Pretty much the most popular move here. And so I spent over 20 minutes here because, in my mind, I'm playing a very strong player, and I know that. And so I want to be very careful. I don't want to rush into any decisions, allow him any chances to, put me under a lot of pressure early. And I felt like I was already under a little bit of pressure because basically the idea of this system in the English is that you have a good structure, you have the bishop pair, but you're a little bit behind in development. So if I don't find a way to sort of catch up on development and get out of the opening in a smooth way, I could be in a lot of trouble. And I knew that, so I looked at a lot of different moves. I thought I can take this pawn, I can take this pawn, I can take this pawn with the knight, I can develop bishop here or here, I can play something like a3 to prevent queen b4. There's so many different ideas. The first thing I realized is that if I take here, I was thinking about this move, right? Kind of pin him, put pressure on the pawn. But then I realized this is a blunder because of queen b4 check. Always got to watch out for checks, and this one is a fork. I'm dropping a piece, so that doesn't work. Then I thought about, moves like a3 I didn't like. I felt like it was too slow. He can either play a5 and sort of clamp down, or he can just castle. And so then I thought, okay, what if I play bishop d3, putting some pressure on the knight? If he plays knight b4, I can even take this pawn. And then if the knight defends the bishop, if he attacks me, I can attack the knight, and we have some crazy trade sequence, and we basically end up in some endgame like this. I thought, okay, that maybe that's possible, but then I thought, what if he takes on d4 and then plays c5? My queen is hit. I can take on g7. But what if he just long castles? And I'm up a pawn here, but my king is still in the center. And if I castle, then maybe he plays something like rook g8, and then I have to go back, and then he can try to attack me. Like, practically speaking, the engine says that this position is like slightly better for white, but this is not the kind of position you want to have, especially against a strong player when you're behind in development. King is still in the center. He's got some play down the d file and the g file, so I thought, okay, then if I have to go back, I also don't like that. So eventually I decided I'm going to take on e5 with the knight, which actually the engine believes is one of the best move, either taking with the knight or the pawn, basically calling black's bluff, because after all, he did play bishop e6 and block the e-pawn, so I take, and he took. And I thought that he would now perhaps castle and then try to win the pawn back later. He could castle either way. He played rook d8, though, which also made sense to me, taking the open d-file. Well, it'll be open once the pawns get traded, of course. And so I thought, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to play bishop e2. And I thought that at this point he would probably castle and then try to just, like, maybe take here, maybe try to go after some weaknesses in my position. I'm up a pawn, but bishop is going to have a hard time getting out. But then he surprised me by going for the line which I had seen with queen b4 check. And I thought, okay, I block with the bishop. And he wins a pawn back here because he can take, and then take this pawn with check. My king goes to c3, he trades, and then he plays a6 to obviously protect the pawn. And I was actually pleasantly surprised when he went for this, because I thought this endgame is pretty comfortably fine for me, maybe even a little bit better. Now, it's funny because I showed this position to a couple of my chess friends who agreed kind of with my opponent that they thought this position might be a little better for black. And I can see why you would think that, because you have these three pawns, basically a 3-on-1 majority on the queen side. But the thing is, it's a deceptive advantage, because you actually can't advance this pawn because of the rook. And even the b pawn you can't advance, because then the a6 pawn is weak. Really, the only pawn you can push is the c pawn, and my king is actually like a good piece here. It's safe, and it actually helps protect the pawn and potentially guard against his future advances. So already I felt pretty good here, and I realized like my plan is going to have to obviously be to play around my nice pawn on e5, right? Because it's potentially a pass pawn if I can trade it for the f pawn, or if I can push my f pawn up and trade one of them for his pawn, could be a good asset. So I decided to play e4. And my plan is pretty simple. I'm going to push this pawn down the board. I'm going to attack his bishop and try to create a pass pawn. He plays king e7. Obviously, it doesn't make sense to castle because he's going to need to have the king sort of in on the action. And I play f4. And he plays c5. And I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have allowed that. Maybe I should have played rook a5. But I thought, okay, it's fine. He obviously is trying to control the center. He wants to play rook d4 and create some counterplay. And so how do I prevent him from doing that? Rook d1. You're not getting in. And so what are you going to do? He decides to play g6, obviously to prevent f5. And now I thought, okay, his c5 pawn is actually a little bit weak. It's okay, now what would you do? How do you put pressure on black here going forward? So what I realized was that the c5 pawn that he pushed, he was trying to use it to control the center, but the pawn itself is pretty weak. So I went and attacked it. Knowing that he can't play b6 because then this pawn drops. If he plays rook c8, then, well, he vacated the d file. I can maybe infiltrate. So he played, he traded the rooks, and then he defended the pawn, which actually also surprised me a little bit. I thought maybe his plan was to play rook d8 and go for active counterplay. I can't take the pawn because my bishop's under attack, so I would have to move it, and then maybe he could come in here. But I realized that I should have it covered because if I play here, it looks like he has this tactic where he takes the pawn, and if I take with the king, then he takes the bishop. But it doesn't work because I can kick the legs out from under him, take the pawn on c5, and then suddenly the rook is hanging and the bishop is hanging. And I guess he can go back here, and I can't really take the bishop because he'll take mine. But once my rook gets into c7, it's pretty annoying for him to deal with. So I thought, this should be fine, and he probably agreed. So he played rook c8. And so now I just got my bishop back into the game. And then he played king d7. And I realized at this moment what his plan was. His plan was to get his king to the queen side, because he realizes that as long as his c5 pawn is under pressure from my rook, it's going to make it very difficult for him to do anything. So his plan is to go here and then here, kick my rook out, and then maybe start pushing the pawns. So I was like, okay, I gotta get my play going. G4, and I'm planning to push f5, and basically I'm planning to trap his bishop. So he plays king c6, and I play f5, and then he dropped his bishop back to d7, and I realized that because I had pushed the pawn, right, I had forced his bishop back, and my plan was to play bishop c4 next and attack f7, but the downside of pushing this pawn up to f5 is that this pawn is now no longer protected. And I realized that when I play bishop c4, he can play rook e8. And if he gets his rook active and if he can get through my pawns on the e-file, then he might actually come out on top. So I had to focus here and figure out what I was going to do, because I don't want to just blow my potential advantage like that. And so I thought, and I realized, okay, I should still play bishop c4. And he played rook e8 like he was intending to. And again, if I take the pawn here, then he takes. And then what I calculated is that if I come back and give a check, he plays king b6. And the problem is now my rook is under attack. I have to go back. And then he can take, and then take this pawn. And that's really annoying, because now when I take, he takes my bishop, and he's up a pawn. And now he has a better position. But what I realized is that in this position, I have a very strong move here, which he had not anticipated, and that is the move b4. And when I played this move, he was definitely thrown off because he spent a lot of time. We had both somewhere in the region of like 20 to 30 minutes, but his next move he spent like 10 or 15 minutes on. and he was not able to come up with the best response. And in honesty, it is a very difficult moment for black. There is 4 moves to consider. There's the obvious move, which is taking the pawn. There is taking this pawn, and there is b6 and b5, all options. So if he takes this pawn, that would play into my hand because the whole point of b4 was to try to get my rook to connect with the e-pawn and protect it. And as long as I can keep this pawn protected, I maintain this strong pawn. He has to defend his f-pawn, and then I can just play this move, and basically he's going to lose the pawn on f7. Like he can't really protect it, because if he plays here, then I get this pawn through. Bad news for black. So that wasn't an option for him. He could have also played b6, but then I would have checked and then taken this pawn, and then come in here. And that's really not great for him either, because, again, he's losing the f-pawn. There was also the option to take on e5, which turned out to have been his best chance to save the game, because I have 2 options here. I can take, and then he also would have 2 options. He can either take on c5, but then I would take this pawn, and this actually should be winning for me, because now this pawn is kind of uncontested. But then there's also the option to play pawn takes. And I think this is the line that the engine gave as being like the best chance for black to defend. I'm up a pawn here, but black has 2 passed pawns of their own, so it's like a very complicated endgame situation. And I guess he just maybe didn't calculate it all the way, or saw it and didn't believe in it, because he ended up playing the move b5, which is unfortunately a losing move for black, because it looks like when I take, I'm in trouble because my rook is under attack and my bishop is under attack, but I can just play rook d6 and attack his bishop. And actually, funny enough, there was an even stronger move that the engine points out, which I didn't even consider, and that's bishop takes f7. A move that just looks ridiculous because you give up your whole rook, but then when you take, you can play e6, and the f-pawn is actually just going to make it through, and the king is too far away. And this would just be a simple win. And I just didn't even consider that because it just looks so insane to give up your rook. But I played rook d6, just a simple move. He took, I took, and now black is just busted because material at this very moment is it even? No, I'm already up a pawn, actually. I'm up a pawn, and I'm going to be up more pawns because I'm now attacking f7. He has to move his king. I take. He takes. I made sure to take this pawn, because if I had taken this one, then he would take here and threaten to take this one with check. Might not matter all that much, but it's still good to be precise. I take. He takes. And now probably there's multiple moves that win here for white, but I took on h7. Because what I had seen is that if he takes on e4, I take on g6, he takes, and then I just play g7. And this is winning for white because basically he has no moves. If he moves his king, I actually promote with check from the rook. And if he doesn't, like let's say he just moves his rook, then I give a check, and then I promote. And then he's going to have to give up his rook, obviously, and that's winning for me as well. So he played g5 just to try to stop the pawn, but I just pushed the f-pawn. I pushed the e-pawn, knowing that if he takes, again, this pawn is going to promote. And so he played this out, but yeah, it's lost for him because I just have too many pawns. He can win this one, but this is a losing king and pawn endgame for black because I will take the opposition and promote my e-pawn, not to mention that I could have just taken the g5 pawn if I wanted to. So he played the move rook a8 just to try to give some, I don't know, last-ditch checks. But can you see the dagger move to win the game here for white? The move I played is the move f8 equals queen. And he resigned because it's a double check. And once he takes the queen, I have rook h8, and I'm skewering, and I'm gonna take his rook, and yeah, a 2300 is not gonna play out with their king on against the rook and king. So yeah, that was a very unexpected, very nice win for me. Game was like close to 4 hours. We started at 7. Actually, probably wasn't 4 hours. It was like 3.5. We started at 7, ended at like 10:30. But still, it was a very long, tiring game, but a very nice result. Unfortunately, the rest of the tournament didn't go that well for me. I then proceeded to lose a very close game to a 2200 WIM, Woman International Master. And then I had a draw and a loss against two kids who were like around 2000. So the tournament, um, I had a win, a draw, 2 losses, and a bye. Finished with 2 out of 5. Not great, but this win was definitely worth all of it to have a nice upset against someone basically 300 points USCF higher and about 250 FIDE. Um, so yeah, hope you enjoyed the game. Hope you learned something from it. Wasn't the most beautiful, but it was just a nice technical win. Sometimes you got to grind out those end games. That's what it takes to be on that high level. And yeah, I'll be back with more next time.